Welcome to Comic-Con at Home 2020.
Woo!
Someday we'll get to meet in person and talk about these things. This is Surviving the Hunger Games. Are the odds ever in your favor? I am Dr. Travis Langley, professor of psychology, best known as the author of the book Batman and Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night, editor and lead writer on a lot of other books where we talk about the psychology of heroes and villains and how we survive anything. Panelists, who are you?
I am Jenna Busch, B-U-S-C-H, like the beer, not the president. I am a writer and host for places like Sci-Fi Wire and Vital Thrills, co-host of a podcast called Hysterical about history. I'm a contributing author to the Psych Geeks book series, and I used to co-host a show with Stan Lee.
I'm America Young, and I am a director, stunt performer, stunt coordinator, and I, in terms of my fandom of Hunger Games, not only read all the books and the movies, seen the movies, but I was also in a Mockingjay Burn fan video, and Comediva did a series called Banff Girls, in which I played Katniss.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Wind Goodfriend. I am a psychology professor at a small private school in Iowa. I have contributed to a lot of the books edited by Travis on psychology and popular culture. Beyond that, I'm probably more well known for the textbooks that I write. I've written 4 psychology textbooks, and the one that's probably the most popular is Psychology. It won the Best Textbook of the Year award last year, so that's exciting for me.
Congratulations.
Cool.
Thank you.
Dr. Deidre Garriott. I'm a lecturer in the Department of English at the University of South Carolina and their Writing Center director. And I am best known for being an editor and contributor to a book by McFarland Press called Space and Place in the Hunger Games, new readings of the trilogy.
Alex Langley. I am an author of numerous books such as Make a Nerdy Living, Kill the Freshman, and the Geek Handbook series. I am also a social psychologist and a contributor to the Psych Geek series.
So hello everyone, I'm Steve Huff. I am an edge weapons and combative specialist, a fight choreographer, martial arts instructor, and actor performer.
Now, a couple of our panelists wanted to discuss what weapon you would each hope to use if you were having to fight in the Hunger Games. So let's start with the ones who suggested that question. You know, what weapons are you eager to talk about?
As a psychologist, of course, I would have to use psychological manipulation to get my enemies to trust me and let their guard down. And then after I got close to them, I actually used to own a martial arts studio, so I would just, karate chop them to death.
So it's a little bit like the strategy of the Survivor show, where the ones who win, it's like you first get people on your side.
Sure.
And use them and turn against them. Okay.
That's right. And act very weak so that you're not perceived as a threat.
Well, I do not look very intimidating, so I think I would definitely start with making people think that I am not scary. Because, yeah, I'm really not scary. But I would, of course, use a bow and arrow, not because Katniss does, but because I'm a video game player and I'm a huge fan of ranged weapons. I feel like you can hide and shoot very well. And I was a makeup artist, so I can also paint myself into stuff like PETA.
Ultimately, I think I would like a long bladed type weapon, like a machete or a batleth, because I feel like that can be used. You don't have to reload it, first of all. You don't have to run out of ammo, and it can be used as a tool for survival, for cutting down things you need to survive in whatever environment you're in. That's ultimately. I thought about long range weapons and explosive, but ultimately this felt like the best bet.
I would use my mouth because I am very good at talking my way into trouble, and I'm almost as good at talking my way out of trouble. So I would just flibber to gibbet my way through the Hunger Games. I would rely on probably getting a crap ton of sponsors beforehand who would just constantly rain stuff down on me because I have no useful survival skills otherwise. So lots and lots of talking.
I don't think I have any survival skills at all. I'm going to be the first one to die. So maybe I should just throw that one out, is I'm going to be killed the moment the Hunger Games starts. But if I could do anything, I am a rhetorician. I teach and study persuasion. So I would try to persuade people to be my allies, get them on my side, and maybe sneakily kill them with like poison or something. If I manage to make it past, the cornucopia.
Steve, you know weapons better than any of the rest of us. What would you pick?
Yeah, I'm kind of afraid to like turn my back on anybody here. Honestly, I would go with a good, trusty knife for both the combative aspects as well as the survival aspects. A good, trusty knife, I can get all the other things that I need.
And just to show our audience that we definitely have opinions about these books and films, and to show that we do know something about them, do you each have a favorite or least favorite book or film? Anybody?
I guess I'll start. Catching Fire is definitely my favorite. And both book and movie. And I think particularly with the movies, for me, it's the first one, you're sort of establishing characters, but I think with the second one, you bring in more interesting ones, and it becomes, because you already know Katniss, Peeta, Gale, Haymitch, Effie, but when you're bringing in Joanna and Beetee and Wyrus, and like, I think that's such a cool group, and particularly, I had read the books first, so particularly knowing what happens with everybody, I found them all fascinating, so that's why that one's my favorite.
I would say the first Hunger Games is my favorite. I feel like it tells it's a cleaner story where Katniss, I feel like she gets a little more passive in each entry in the trilogy as we go on, to where she's getting led around by her nose a little more by the other characters, whereas in the first one, she's kind of actively dealing in this situation the same as anybody else. Plus, the first one, I think, has the most of that kind of the perverse pageantry of the Hunger Games. That you get plenty of in the second one, but then the third one is basically lacking entirely. And I think that perverse pageantry is something that really makes the Hunger Games interesting and really makes it stand out compared to a lot of its other dystopic YA contemporaries.
For me, the first was the best, partially just because I like the introduction of the dystopian world and the kind of history of how they got to where they were. I also really found it kind of personally disturbing to enjoy the first book so much, because the point, or one of the main points of the trilogy, is the idea that the games themselves are popular for this really perverse reason, right? Like, people are watching other people get killed, and that's really weird that you would want to watch that. But we, as fans of the books and movies, are the ones enjoying that. So it's kind of this uncomfortable meta experience, and I had that the most when I read and watched the first.
That Catching Fire, both the film and the book are my favorites, even though it suffers from being a middle book in a trilogy. So we need the beginning of the first book, we need the final book to get the end of the story. But I think as someone so my research focuses on public memory, it's interesting to see how the Capitol manipulates Peeta and Katniss to perpetuate a particular mythology about the Capitol, about the Hunger Games, and we get to see a little bit more of the trauma that they experience as fallout or surviving the Hunger Games, and that, kind of returning to our theme, that issue of, do you actually survive the Hunger Games? But I can't say it's necessarily a pleasant read, and I agree with Alex, Katniss is much more passive as the books go on.
Yeah, I've actually really enjoyed the first one. I had come into it not being familiar with the books before seeing the films. And for me, seeing the way they established the different levels of the society, and then even among the different districts, you really get to see that rivalry that is kept there and keeping them from being able to put aside their differences. And then just seeing that introduction to the games themselves, and you really get a sense of the horror that it brings into the lives of these people.
How in the world does somebody prepare for the Hunger Games? So these people grow up in a society where they all know it's possible, but it's not going to affect most of them. So most people will not spend their lives really preparing for this. You have a limited amount of time to prepare. So what do you prepare? Mentally or skills? How do you prepare for the Hunger Games?
Right. That is something that I just kept asking myself watching it the first time, because we're not talking about professional soldiers. We're not talking about anybody whose life is dedicated to fighting. These are children. They're children that are possibly having to go off to not only to fight to survive, but to have to kill to survive. And I don't think there is a way that mentally you can ever really prepare yourself for that. What it comes down to in when you're dealing with like high threat, high stress response situations, it comes down to training the body to respond instinctively, taking elements of your already existing personality and learning how to best accentuate them when you get into a high threat, high stress situation where you're not going to have a lot of time to think. With weapons training, that's why you do so many drills, because it has to get to that point where it's response without really thinking about it, but it just can't be response without thought. That's how you get killed. So a lot of it is just focusing on the main goal and trying to just take everything, every other distraction, and put it aside. It's hard.
Most people aren't training for it, right? So that's why there's such a high body count right at the top, because these are all the people who have just been surviving. These are the people who are just at the bare necessity of survival. They don't get enough food to eat. They don't get enough warm clothes. They don't get enough exercise. So to train for the Hunger Games, I would think it's more about the marathon of it and the stamina of it. And I hate this part, but the ability to cause harm to somebody else, that is something you need to learn how to switch out of. Because as a human race, thankfully, the majority of us, our knee-jerk response is to how not to hurt someone. And you have to push through that mental thing that pushes you into actually causing pain and then to actually kill someone. So that's where the training should come in, is how to commit murder and be a sociopath.
Because I have a tendency to try to over prepare for situations I'm never going to be in. Like, if I were in space and this happened, what would I do? I don't know why I do this, but I do. So I have a feeling probably if I lived in one of those societies, I probably would have looked at every little thing I do. Like if I'm hunting, like Katniss, or if although that'd be weird because I'm a vegetarian, but still plant gathering, that sort of thing. I'd probably be like, if I ever get in the Hunger Games, what would I use this for? I have a feeling I'd end up doing that.
I also wonder too if there's a community element to it. So we're not just talking about like the physical preparation, but sort of a community-based preparation. So one of the things that we see in the Hunger Games is that Katniss doesn't have a close relationship with her mother, and is very distant from many of her peers. And while we could just attribute this to Katniss being a little standoffish, I think there's also a reality knowing that every year someone is going to be chosen to die, and it could be your child or it could be your peers, right? So I think there's maybe some emotional, I'm not in psychology at all, so I don't know. I'm just thinking about this from a literary perspective and the relationships that Katniss does and does not build and how difficult it is for her. And I feel like that's a fallout from the Hunger Games, and that's also preparation for it. Not being close to other people because they could be someone that you have to face. They could be an opponent.
The mindset of Katniss's that you're talking about is also, that's something that was instilled in her from an early age, from when her father died prematurely. And I think that a lot of the other people who live in the poorer districts probably have that same mentality, because it's drilled into their heads that, life is not something that should be expected. No one has any kind of a life expectancy because it could be snatched away at any time.
With the case of the children from poorer families, they're buying extra chances into the Hunger Games to get just some meager provisions, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that too. I mean, the odds aren't in their favor, and we see Katniss and Gale really mocking that at the beginning of the Hunger Games, because they know that their chances are grim in terms of the lottery.
I also see kind of a correlation between sort of physically preparing to be a killer if you are, chosen as tribute, and kind of a loss of your humanity. we see the career tributes who sort of universally are a-holes. Can I say that?
Monsters. Monsters.
And then you see, people like Rue, who, is at the bottom of the list in terms of the odds being in her favor. She's, the most wonderful person in the competition. So, so it's interesting to think about, am I preparing simply to survive, which I think is the mentality of most people, or kind of like what Peta says at the beginning, am I preparing to get through this while maintaining my humanity?
And I think also with some of the characters like Rue or Foxface, they're not so much preparing to be killers as they're preparing to they're trying to focus on whatever skills they already have that might help them out. Like Rue definitely, at no point do we get any indication that she was training to learn how to kill people. She just wanted to out-hide others and run away from others and just hope that she would be the last person standing because everybody else had wiped each other out.
Katniss does that at a point at the beginning. It's not until she cuts down the what are they called? The jacker, like the wasps.
The tracker jackers.
Yes, tracker jackers. That we see her actively harming one of the contestants, and it's really more out of defense. She needs to get out of a tree, but for a long time, Katniss is surviving on her skills as well and not actively seeking out. And so it's interesting that Katniss sort of rebuffs Peta when he says, I want to come out of this as authentically as possible. But yet we see at the very beginning that that's kind of what she's doing.
Well, and she admits, she says something like, I can't afford that kind of mentality, right? Because I have to get back and protect my sister and my mom. And so she kind of acknowledges, I have to give up some of who I would like to be in order to physically survive this.
Yeah.
What kind of person wants to be in the Hunger Games? Some places people regularly volunteer, but even in the real world, people will enter very dangerous behaviors. Why would someone do this? What kind of person does that? We could easily say they're all psychopaths and they would have a higher rate, but no, that's not all there is to it. I definitely see Steve shaking his head there.
One of the things that it obviously made me think of was gladiatorial combat. And there were a surprisingly high number of free people that went in to become gladiators simply because that was the best option that they had. So somebody that might volunteer for it, it might be for their family. And then, of course, you obviously have Katniss who does it to save her sister, but for others, that might be the only chance they will ever have at something better.
Yeah, I mean, it's because it's a rigged system. I think that to try to place the blame on any one individual is there's not as much blame that falls on the individuals. Like, sure, there's going to be somebody who's just inherently bloodthirsty, but statistically speaking, that's going to be extremely rare. But we're going to have a lot more of our people who are so ground down or pushed in place by this rigged system that the Capitol has set up that they are electing to go into the Hunger Games because they think it's their only option. It's not that you've got these bad actors, these bad apples ruining everything by just being murderers because it's fun. You have it that the Capitol has set up a system that benefits them and makes life harder for the vast, vast majority of people.
If your family is so poor and you're starving and you're trying to bring some sort of stability and you actually think you have a chance of winning, or if you like to hurt people, that would be the other person that would. But if you're a good person, it's a sacrifice for others. You're being a martyr.
The career people are different, but if you live in a district where your life is pretty crappy anyway, you might consider joining just to figure my life's going to be short anyway, so I might as well enjoy it and be proud of it and have all of these wonderful things happening to me. Even like with the careers, they're choosing to train and choosing to have a purpose. If you grow up in a place where there is one industry and you can't imagine your life doing that industry, you figure, well, I'll try that. Might as well give it a shot. I also think of people who tend to like to do really sort of risky things like bungee jumping or extreme sports or things like that, who might be, adrenaline junkies. I am not a psychologist, so I'm just guessing there. I don't have that in me at all. There's no bungee jumping, but I would imagine people who for whom risk is exciting might try that.
Remember that the district gets rewarded for the tribute who wins. So there's also an opportunity not just to help yourself, not just to get into Victor's village and enjoy a better life personally, but you also help your community. And we do see the bonds of community in the books and the movies, and how important that is, that it's through community or the lack of it that people survive.
Alex brought up the issue of classism, how the rich kids are pitting the poor against each other. And I'd already thought about a comparison with prisons. One of the ways that the small number of guards keep everybody from not just overwhelming the guards is by encouraging racism, encouraging people to form groups that will hate each other within the prison.
The lottery system that we've been talking about, how the poorer your family is, the more you end up being encouraged to put your name in more so that your family gets additional resources. And this causes infighting. Even at the beginning of the Hunger Games, Katniss refers to how in District 12, that Gale dislikes the mayor's kid because she only had to put her name in once, because even though they're poor as dirt, just like everybody at District 12, they're not quite as poor as dirt as everyone else. And so that is encouraging that infighting, encouraging people to get mad at the people for whom, the fault does not lie, instead of getting angry at the people who created the unfair system.
And this is a real problem in the real world. And for me, I've spent some time as a social psychologist, just like Alex, studying prejudice. And I went to Rwanda for a summer and studied the genocide from 1994. And we have the Hutus and the Tutsis who, for hundreds of years, really didn't have much fighting, got along just fine. And then white colonists came in, pitted them against each other, and now we have a genocide. So it's really this idea of people who have power, kind of distracting you from attacking them by making you attack each other. And we have a lot of similar examples of this in real life.
Mm-hmm. It's the boss encouraging the customers to get mad at the employees who are on strike for unfair wages, instead of getting mad at the boss who's not paying anybody very well.
It's this division that keeps happening, right? Just in terms of the districts and pitting the districts against each other, pitting children and essentially families against each other, making like poverty into an actual striation, so we don't like each other, right? These are all these efforts that the government is doing, and we're seeing them happening right now.
So the Hunger Games is a modern day, it's a different version of the Gladiator War, where you cause these people to pick sides and root against each other instead of the bigger problem, which is how the Capitol ultimately was able to keep everyone down. Not only was it the fear of their kids being in the Hunger Games, but it became about the districts fighting each other and having their own issues against each other for various reasons. They had their own sociological issues with the different. So then they're not focusing on the capital, which is ultimately the puppet master. And I think that's fascinating. And I think that civilizations have done that across time in the world, where they pit people against each other so that the people are focusing on the fight right in front of them and not focusing on the diabolical things happening above their heads.
These conflicts at every level also appeal to us as viewers,
Mm-hmm.
although it works better with specific faces. I know Wind and Jenna wanted to talk about that love triangle at the level of the specific faces. Is this a necessary conflict?
Well, I mean, for me, I don't mind it, because what I think is so interesting is, I'm 47, so, I've grown up with love triangles and love this, and every story has to have a love story. And look, I love love. Love is lovely. But I think it's really interesting to see a protagonist, particularly a female protagonist, say, like, I don't have time for this. Like, which one of us are you going to choose? You know what? I'm going to try not to die first, and then I'll think about that. And though, she's still a teenage girl, she's still going back and forth between them. She's still discussing her relationship here and there. But really, her focus is less about about which one she's picking for the most part, and more about how she's going to survive. And, you know, there are a couple things that are very interesting in there that are, you know, that, you know, Gale says to her, like, she's going to go, or I think he says it to PETA, she's going to go with the person that she can't live without. So it's less about like, who's going to like me, and more like, who is important to my survival as a person and my thriving as a person. You don't see that with a lot of protagonists, particularly female protagonists, you know, and also she's a very, as much as I hesitate to say strong female characters, like she's a very strong character, and she takes a different role, I think, than normally we see in YA, where you have one of the guys who is less physically powerful. He is more willing to hide. He's more willing to sort of bend to make other people feel good, which is a lovely quality, but it's not something you see in a male lead very often. So I just like the way everything is sort of turned on its head, and how we're seeing a very different priority for the protagonist.
One of the things that I always find fascinating is this struggle that she has choosing between Gale and PETA, because I think in other circumstances, she would have ended up with Gale. And, you know, in social psych, we have this phenomenon called sometimes excitation transfer, or sometimes misattribution of arousal, where you kind of trick yourself into thinking that you're attracted to someone or in love with someone. And it's really because of the situation. And it's because you've gone through maybe a trauma together, or the adrenaline of the situation has caused you to kind of feel your own mortality, or just the physical arousal you interpret as sexual arousal, basically. And so, you know, in the Hunger Games, they're constantly in these situations where they're about to die. And PETA happens to be right there. So social psychology would have predicted that she ended up with PETA, if nothing else, because the environment had their adrenaline pumping. Whereas I think if things had been otherwise, she certainly would have ended up with Gale instead.
Also, that they talk about that phenomenon in Speed, of all movies, kind of at the end. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock are talking about how, you know, relationships born out of extreme situations don't often last. Something else I wanted to add that I think is interesting with that love triangle is that very frequently with, particularly in YA novels where you've got a love triangle, it's basically, you know, dark-haired white guy and blonde white guy, which we have that again here, but they're both more or less kind of the same. Maybe one's a little more of a bad boy. But in the Hunger Games, what is really interesting about the love triangle is that we see a difference in Katniss's behavior with each of the guys, because with Gale, she behaves more in ways that are more typical of heroines throughout literature, in that she is more of the caregiver and a little more passive, whereas with PETA, he's more of the caregiver. He's more concerned with her well-being, and she's the active one. So that's also part of why, well, part of many reasons I think it's more interesting and rad that she ended up with PETA rather than Gale.
It seems also like a statement on toxic masculinity, right? Because at first, I was maybe a little bit Team Gale early on in the novels, but I increasingly moved to Team PETA, because I didn't like Gale in Mockingjay, and I didn't like him in Catching Fire either. He was so critical of her all the time, and the choices that she had to make that she didn't necessarily want to make. And we especially see in Mockingjay sort of a hot and cold nature to their relationship. And we know PETA is psychologically tortured and comes back with some mental illness and some trauma that's going to last. But when he does recover himself, he's a different kind of man compared to Gale. He is more nurturing. He is more willing to let Katniss take the lead, but he also does push her in ways that help shape her into a better person. He just does it without any kind of real violence behind it, with the exception of when he comes back after being hijacked.
You won. You survived the Hunger Games. I think this is especially for our psychologists in the panel. Well, that would include me, but we've already got two of you. How does that affect a person? Is it going to be PTSD, post-traumatic growth, or what?
For most of them, Probably PTSD. Probably for some of the careers, though, the District 1 and 2 entrants, we're going to see post-traumatic growth because the trauma is not going to traumatize them in the same way because they're so prepared for it. So it's going to feel a lot more victorious. But for somebody like, you know, Katniss, who has like numerous symptoms of PTSD that she's still, you know, actively hallucinating, she can't pull out of the Hunger Games, and she and Pete even have conversations about how like it's like they've never really left that arena. So I'm gonna say, yeah, you're gonna have a lot of PTSD across the board. I mean, even Haymitch, who's decades older, he is still badly coping. When we first meet him, we think that he's just a drunk and a jerk, but we see no, he is heartbroken over what he had to do in the Hunger Games. He's heartbroken after having to see year after year after having to watch these tributes constantly die. So he is a drunk and he is distant because it is his very bad coping mechanism.
Now, I'm not a psychologist, but I definitely would, I would say that the first thing you'd probably recommend to these people is therapy. You're not getting it there. I didn't see a single psychologist character in the book, so not a thing. But the other thing is, from what, particularly with Finnick, what you see is that even after the games are over, you're still being sold to people. You're still being psychologically tortured by Snow, and I'm assuming anybody before him. I just think like it never really stops. Like there's never a chance to say, okay, now I'm going to go home and now I'm going to take care of my own recovery, because you're still in it.
Mm-hmm.
Haymitch, we find out like his girlfriend and his family were systematically killed off. Over and over again. Joanna, the same thing. She tells us, you know, she has nothing left. So I can only imagine just the constant stress you're under. And we see that in Catching Fire when Katniss realizes what the stakes are, that there is no safety afterward.
What's the best thing about the Hunger Games as a story? I mean, for us.
For me, it's seeing a protagonist who actually has a reaction to things that happen to them. Because generally what we've seen is, you know, you go through trauma or you go through a big gun battle or you're killing people and then you're like, now I'm kind of dark and I wear sunglasses. Like, that's not what would well, probably not what would happen, but I'm sure everyone wears sunglasses. But I think it's just nice to see somebody actually really having a lasting reaction to things. I think, you know, with a lot of the fiction that we consume, you know, as kids, we see all these people who just get over it and move on, or have like a moment where they're like, oh, I miss this person, and that's it. There's no reaction, so you feel very alone. If you're actually having PTSD over something, you're like, well, they wouldn't. So I think it's really important to see a character who has reactions to things and doesn't get over everything, but still lives and moves on with her life. I'm done now, I swear.
I think what you just said about this example of people seeing those heroes and thinking they wouldn't, and need examples where they see that they do, is one of the smartest things I've ever heard, actually, Jen.
Thank you. That made my day.
I saw a meme on Facebook that said something like, you can't raise a generation of people on Hunger Games, Insurgent, Star Wars, and not expect a rebellion. So, you know, the fact that I think we're inspiring people to stand up for what they find to be systematic injustice, I think that that's an inspiring part of the Hunger Games, saying we don't accept the status quo. And for me, I liked the Hunger Games movies, especially in terms of them proving that you can make money using a movie with a female main character, right? Which was a debate, apparently, until this movie came out. So, you know, maybe we'll finally get like a Black Widow movie that's supposed to come out soon. And just proving that, oh, you actually can, you know, care about women.
I saw a meme come up that was similar, and it was saying something along the lines of, how did you feel when you saw the old man in District 11 whistle Rue's tune and do the salute? You can't feel support for him and not support Black Lives Matter.
Right.
And that was really one of my takeaways. And again, it has to deal with the fact that I'm a rhetorician who does like social justice work. But it was huge to me to have this book and see it part of a genre of dystopian where we have teenagers in broken societies trying to knit these societies together and showing us what kind of change we can make when we do come together and we fight, when we resist. And that resistance can look like all kinds of things. It can be physically violent, but it also can include other ways of making change. I mean, we see that with PETA and the beauty he puts into the world too. That's so valid. And so for me, you know, that's the most inspiring thing about the books is, and the movies too, are the scenes when we see the districts come together and fight back. That's really powerful to me.
I didn't see a meme related to mine, but tagging on what Deidre and Wind were saying, yeah, I like that the Hunger Games stories portray systemic problems as being the root of problems, because it's far too simple and it's far too easy for a lot of stories to say, well, this system is fine. It's fine that this kingdom has an oppressive monarch, because if you get rid of that bad monarch, then we'll have a good king who'll take care of everybody. But the Hunger Games shows, like, yeah, I mean, it's obviously things are worse when you've got someone oppressive and fascist in charge, but when the problems are systemic, you need to break the system and rebuild it. And I think that's a powerful and important message, and a message that too few stories will focus on, and instead we'll just focus on the easy fix of, well, we got that mean old king back in charge. Now we've got a slightly nicer king. He's a little nicer king.
I absolutely agree. With rewatching it now is just such a different feeling with everything that's going on, and you definitely see the way they use the different districts and all of that, and everything is just, it's total manipulation to keep everybody on edge and to keep everybody antagonistic towards each other. And you know, we can see mirrors of that in the real world. So I absolutely, watching this film now, it's like watching it again for the first time.
For people who want to praise you or curse you after this video comes out, where can people find you online? I am at Superheroologist, one of the 10 most followed psychologists on Twitter. Just look for Travis Langley, Twitter or Facebook. I'm easy to find.
I'm at Jenna Busch everywhere, BUSCH, because I get daily messages for the other Jenna Busch. So just, we both have a check mark. Just, I'm the other one. And I have a podcast called Hysterical. It's HISTERICAL. So you can find us everywhere, Hysterical Pod.
I'm the only Wind Goodfriend as far as I know. So if you Google me, you will find me.
I'm on Twitter at Deidre Garriott, on Facebook, Deidre Ann Evans Garriott. So those are my most active places. Feel free to yell at me.
I'm on Instagram at Creative Combat and Facebook at Creative Combat. So you can find out everything that I'm doing there.
And for the people who want to say nice things to me, I am Alex Langley at Rocket Llama on Twitter and rocketllama.com. And for the people who want to say mean things to me, I don't have a Twitter.
And on that note, thank you all for joining us. Peace out.
Thank you.
Action in the specific movies was great. I mean, it was grounded. It was realistic. It was brutal. I just rewatched the cornucopia scene, and it made me gasp in horror several times. So the way that they executed in the movie was wonderful and awful, because they're all kids. And you forget about that. When you watch the whole context of the movie, you forget that they're kids, because you start to relate to them as grown-ups, especially because Katniss, played by Jennifer Lawrence, is such a mature, wise performance. But when you watch that scene out of context, specifically the cornucopia scene, oof, it's awful. It's in the best possible way. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that.